I will send the link to anyone if you want to share it with your friends or anyone who wants to join or watch the the discussion afterwards. So welcome everyone. My name is Jean-Michel. I will send the link to anyone if you want. My name is Jean-Michel, and I am the director of iDebate Rwanda, and we're very, very excited to be working with our friends from all the way in San Francisco. It's, I think, 11 a.m. there, and it's 8 p.m. here. And the wonders of technology is that we can all be in the same space and be able to discuss about things that are affecting the world as we know it. And so before we get started, I'd like to give just the floor to Nathan to just say a few welcoming words, and then just introduce everyone who's here, either from your team or the different people who are have helped you make this happen. Nathan, the word is yours.
Thank you so much, Jean-Michel, and I'm excited for this first event. I'm also kind of excited for continuing partnerships and just kind of relationship building across borders of all different sorts, all of them imaginary, I think, but national borders. I've been thinking about disciplinary borders in terms of the different sort of modes of inquiry that we might approach a topic like the one that we're dealing with today. But I'm on sabbatical this semester, and so my focus was really on trying to kind of cultivate more relationships with students and trying to work with student organizations. And that has been a learning experience, but the conversations that I have had with students have really felt like an important part of my kind of professional development. The topic that maybe pulled you into this space, I think, has a lot of different possibilities for where the conversation and the dialogue might go. And I think that kind of chaos can be a little bit unsettling for some folks, but I think that the real intention is to, again, create some of those relationships and dialogues, but also like pull students into spaces and actually hear less from me and more from you. And so forensics programs, speech and debate programs are really kind of at the heart of that, where educators get to kind of challenge the way that we think about some of the power dynamics that maybe play out in the classroom. So I'm excited to kind of think about relationship building outside of classroom spaces, and I'm excited to continue what I think is still like the forensics sort of spirit, in terms of not just sort of giving students information to if we think about Freire and kind of critical pedagogy, and not just like thinking about students as objects, but embracing their subjectivities. I think that debate and encouraging kind of critical reflection in all different sorts of ways is really how we get there. Jean-Michel, I was going to say just a couple quick things about framing the topic, only maybe taking a couple minutes, but I know that we also wanted to start with just kind of learning a little bit more about the iDebate Rwanda organization. So maybe I can pause there, but I guess I also want to acknowledge, I know we've got some forensic students that are in the classroom space right now, and Sage Russo and Alexis Litsky, who co-direct the team with me and have really kind of stepped into that role as I'm on sabbatical this semester, might be able to identify them a little bit more than I can. But I'll also say that Sage invited their intercultural communication class here. I don't know how many of those students are in this space as well, but that the goal was really to actually think about forensics as the center, and maybe some of you will think about joining a speech and debate team for some of the reasons that I've talked about, but actually to kind of like leave some of the competitiveness that comes along with a typical speech and debate tournament to the side. And I'll end here, just in favor of creating those relationships, these kind of collaborative, open spaces that I think that have possibility within them, maybe just as much as some of the expectations that we have about sort of navigating cultural differences, for examples. So Sage and Alexis, I don't know if either one of you want to chime in. I know Linda, I remember from the forensics team last semester, you know, and I'll say, like, it's COVID. So for sustaining a forensics team has been challenging during this time. And I think that that's part of, that was part of this moment of like, what else should we be doing to kind of think about forensics spaces and what a program might do. So we don't have a bunch of returning students right now, and that is a challenge, I guess, I want to be open
about. Good evening, everyone. My name is Christelle. I'm the communications person at iDebate. And for those who don't know iDebate, iDebate is an NGO that uses debate to promote public discourse and public speaking skills. So today our speakers are Amandine and Nika. They've been part of our they were once part of our programs, but they have graduated. One is in college and the other one has graduated. I'm gonna give them the floor to give their initial thoughts, and then we can go on from there. Amandine, do you want to share initial thoughts?
Okay, cool. Thank you. Hi, I am Mangwa Amandine, and I am currently a senior and international student from Pomona College, and I'm majoring in French and Africana Studies. And I'm also a debate alumni. And so to start this conversation, I just figured I would share some thoughts and we could run from there. One thing that I wanted to share is definitely that we are currently in a new era of information, you know, an era where you can access any kind of information, almost any, from anywhere in the world at your fingertips through the internet. And so that is both amazing and super scary, to be honest. And so at least in the era of the internet, one thing that I would say is very impactful and that makes internet a key tool is that it is it's openness, it's freedom and tolerance and ability to connect the world. And so it has become something very important and something that can impact ideological and moral aspects of anyone who has access to it. And so, especially during this pandemic, honestly, the media, the internet has allowed, for instance, us students to be able to still be able to attend school, stay connected with our peers around the world. For instance, I still take classes online from Pomona College while I'm here at home. And from that, I really do I think I do almost everything in the comfort of my room. And I've been able to attend conferences, events, and access so many resources that I guess otherwise I wouldn't be able to access due to the way they're time sensitive and, you know, I would need to travel, whatnot, right? And so now I'm just like there attending every single thing that I want from my laptop in my room, right? And one other thing, I'm an artist myself. I love to think that I am going to be an author, so I've been writing. And so as an artist, I consume so much media through the internet in form of movies, literature, music, you name it, graphic art, everything, yeah, right? And so that said, a lot of popular media that we see, a lot of the cinema, literature, for example, about Africa on the global stage, tend to isolate the continent as the other, because they tend to focus on what is going wrong, right? Whatever famine is going on, whatever coup d'etat is going on, whatever president is dying. And so many times it's really true. Sometimes it's not, but more times it's true, but it's only a portion of the bigger story. And so most times these images automatically construct Africa, or you can put any other place as the other. So I want us today to reflect on the power that has, and also on the downfall of being this powerful, of the fact that the rest of the world sees a certain place as the other. I also want to talk about, I'm going to talk about so many things. But one other thing that I wanted to mention is, for example, the Black Lives Matter movement in the past year. It's been quite successful to the expense of certain things, right? But it's been accentuated by the wide broadcast on the internet, on social media platforms, of the events, the protests, everything that's happening around the world. And this gives us, I want to say, a fake feeling of being all interconnected. Yes, it does connect us, but in so many ways also it's just like virtual. Now, one thing that I noticed is, especially for the Black Lives Matter movement right now that I'm mentioning, is the need to appeal to the moral consciousness of other people who don't understand the struggles, right? And so this is done by sharing, yes, a bunch of resources, but mostly really wild imagery of Black death. And what this does is, in so many ways, it, yes, does raise some kind of awareness, but it also normalizes Black death. It normalizes the violence done to this minority. And so my question today is there other ways that we can raise awareness to global issues without needing to use or normalize these violent visuals? Is there other ways to keep everybody's humanity in this world, regardless of which issue we're talking about? I only talked about Black Lives Matter right now, and probably the way the African continent is viewed on like cinema, whatever. But think of any global issue that's there. Is there ways to keep everybody's humanity without the need of appealing to the moral consciousness by proving that this terrible thing is happening, but by actually acting on it without necessarily making these visuals what we see every day? Because at the end of the day, it's tiring to keep seeing people dying. It's tiring to, see yet again another Black person killed, right? It's tiring to be organizing, and the same day where there is like judgment for George Floyd case, we have another Black person killed that same day. How do we reconcile this world where we can all be connected at the same time, but also, keep our humanity? I don't know if I make sense, but that's it I have today, and I'm happy to have conversation around that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amandine. Mecca, do you have any initial thoughts before we can have Nathan's introduce the panels from their side?
Thank you very much. My name is Mecca. I was part of the iDebate Rwanda since 2019. 2009 to 2015. I was part of the debate team that visited the US in 2018. Sadly, I didn't have a chance to be in San Francisco, but I hope the next time I come, I might have a chance to be there. My initial thoughts on this conversation, I think for me, as Amandine said, the fact that we are connected as the world, and we are really like close to each other because of the media and also the internet. For me, I look at it also in the angle of culture. We find that the more we become connected, some of the things that our parents believe to be called to like in society, that is like the culture, the way we dress, the way we speak, the music we play, the kind of events that we hold. Now, some of them get lost within that connection. So you find that we're no longer like having the culture the way our parents want it. We're not having the culture the way we were taught in school how our culture used to be. Now, because of that connection, we kind of lose that. But I also think on a positive note, though, it's a good thing because we are becoming more civilized. The more we learn about other cultures from all over the world, we become more civilized in that way. And I'll say it's both-sided. There is the negative part of it, and also there is the positive part of it, because it's not going to be hard to do like trade together, to do business together, or even to have these kind of friendships and connections like we're doing now. It's not going to be hard. But also, if you look at the generations to come, for instance, in our country, in Rwanda, where we take culture to be like very close to our hearts, you find that it's very hard that to keep the culture like being passed on to the next generations. And also the other thing that I find not kind of complicated in the today's world, because of the media we consume, online, movies, all the thing like on the social medias. I think the part of fake news has also, like we've seen in this era, that fake news has really dominated our lives. If you look at Trump, I would say, however much the social media, Facebook, Twitter, they stepped in and blocked him on or blocked all his networks. But then you could realize that people were consuming a lot of information on like from his tweets. But now also you find that people after listening to Trump, or after seeing what Trump is posting, then no one goes ahead to kind of like think, is this true? Is this not true? How do you balance the reality people consume on the media, the reality that we consume on social media, and the reality that is on ground? How do you tell someone that what Trump is saying is not true, but also how do you prove to them that it's not true without using the same media that Trump is using to give the message? So kind of like I find it really hard for people to balance the reality we consume on media and also the life, the reality that we have in life. And so to me, I think those are my main views on this conversation, and I'm really looking forward to learn more from the other panelists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Meka and Amandine. So for those who don't know what the topic is today, it's very interesting the way it's framed. It's deconstructing media and reconstructing each other. So I'm gonna send how it's written in the chat so everybody can look at it. And if anybody in the audience has any thoughts they would like to share, the floor is open. This is an open dialogue, and we hope to learn from each other today. Thank you.
Thank you so much to the panelists for framing the discussion, and I think giving us a lot of different things to think about. Certainly my brain feels like it's on fire and moving in a bunch of different directions. So we are gonna open things up now. So if you've got something to say, I think raise your hand or start using the chat. And I'll also note that we're going to have another event in May that might be about a similar topic. It might be about something else. And so there's a space for continued collaboration outside of here. I think the title, I hope it does invite you into the discussion. We have a bunch of fun with titles, I think. I was gonna say that I guess I have some nervousness with the idea of like reconstructing each other, because it does sound a little bit like we're like, let me help people who are in a cultural group that is not my own. Let's build you up and let's pick. And that's not at all what I think we are thinking or talking about, right? It's more of the way that we socially imagine the other, right? So it's inward work that we are, I think, being invited to do. And I think our panelists get at this idea of like, how do we think critically, so that not only do we not absorb fake news, but that we don't like absorb and buy into, you know, simplistic, stereotypical understandings of cultural others. And I think that there's lots of good questions about how do we break out of those understandings. A few interesting directions I just want to mark that we can go in. I think the idea that technology gives us access to all of these like different spaces where we can like learn, I agree. And I've certainly tried to push myself to move into cultural spaces where like I don't necessarily belong, and to be a listener, right? And to be one that is not trying to take charge of anything, but just trying to kind of expand and maybe kind of develop some cultural humility. I don't know if everybody does that though. And I don't know if the people who need to do it the most will do it. And I guess so many things to talk about, but I guess I wanted to spend a little bit of time thinking more about representations of Black death, about how that becomes ubiquitous. I mean, you're making some really important points there, and there's folks within the forensics community that have done some like powerful programs about like how we need to center more Black joy. Or even the way that we understand slavery as being about like the pain and suffering of Black people in this country, which it is, but it's also could be like the construction of all of the wealth on which now our country is built. And I don't know if that's not like joy exactly, but it certainly is. Maybe there's lots of ways that I think we can complicate this kind of simple othered, right? And as we talk about the other, it's like people lose all of their dimension. Cultures get flattened out into something that then justifies colonialism and justifies genocide. And that may feel like it's far away from where like maybe the construction of different others is in our country, but to me, it's not so far away. I also wanted to, I mean, I'm a white person, right? And so when we talk about like the normalization of Black death, I think that there's something happening with how white folks are sometimes responding to that, right? So like the conviction of George Floyd, and some of the Black scholars that I like to follow have kind of said, like the celebration of white people over this conviction is totally abstracting this one case from the larger context in which it lives. But the larger thing I think is when we represent like the evil white person, it's like then white liberals can kind of distance them from that. And so representations of the white supremacist, like the actual like individual people that chant like really racist things and that's very real, right? And that has been an awakening for white people to see that represented and to know that lives. But it's also been a representation that's created some distance, right? And so when you were talking about like the connection or the disconnection, I think not only about like the cultural other, but I even think about the way that like representations of whiteness, sometimes people create this distance. And because there's this representation of the white supremacist over here, I can sort of start to think that white supremacy as a system like somehow doesn't live in me, or it doesn't live in me as much. And that feels like a deeply sort of problematic thing in terms of representation. Oh gosh, I talk so much because you planted so many interesting seeds, but I want other folks to raise their hand, and I do want to kind of like pull us into the dialogue. And I know that I could go on because, yeah, Victor. You're on mute, Victor.
Hi. So I'm a part of the intercultural communication class, and I just wanted to input some ideas that I had. So I definitely agree that media is very powerful, and what we see on TV kind of becomes our reality and what we see in the world. So, you know, with everything that we might see on a news outlet, for example, is how we're going to perceive the world around us. And I think that we know that that's not the case everywhere. I mean, yeah, there's very grave issues that are going on around the world, but also I think that leads me to my other topic is we need to start reconstructing each other and seeing how we view one another. You know, we need to start seeing each other as brother and sister and see what similarities, you know, we do have. You know, we might be a part of different cultures, but at the end, we're still human, and we just need to embrace the differences and appreciate them as well, because we all come from different paths, and I think it's very beautiful just to hear each other story and see, where they came from, and regardless if they're from a different region or different country, and if they have different beliefs, like, I might not share the same beliefs as one person, but I still need to view them as a human, and, respect whatever they believe in. And, I think that's a healthy environment to be in. And also it's a environment where we can grow and learn, and, possibly just tell our own stories that we've experienced and pass them on to the people that we know, and show them and tell them that, there's different cultures out there, and, it's beautiful, and, not everything that we see on TV is, real. And we kind of just need to go out there and see what the world has to offer and what people have to offer as well. But yeah, that is my 2 cents.
Thanks, Victor. That was well said. And I think, like, how the similarities and the differences, right? And holding on to both of those things as we navigate like relationships, I guess is some of what I'm hearing, right? So do we develop the kind of critical capacities to resist some of those sort of representations? Do we need to like build relationships that challenge those? Do we need better media? Because I mean, arguably, better media representations have moved forward a lot of the things that that you were rightly marking, Victor, right? To celebrate some of the places of connection, but to also not have all of those places of difference necessarily get lost or homogenized in favor of a simple, digestible sort of representation of this group, right? Thanks, Victor.
I think if I can add one thing that I wanted to also add, I think that one of the things that I think sometimes is hard is to, just like Nathan has said, we like to simplify things. And I think most of the time when we say talk of the cultural other, we most of the time mean the way white people view other cultures. But I also think we also need to see the way in which other cultures view white people. Because part of what I think the danger of what I see a lot in this, with the media, I mean, with all the things that are happening, with, some of the, killings that have happened, some of the, racially motivated killings that have happened, is that sometimes I think that the media strives on making us go against each other, meaning in a sense that we then start thinking that the white person, all white people are guilty of certain things, or and which becomes almost almost some people call it reverse racism, and I don't even want to go there because it becomes that would be the one way of getting people to react. And there's a lot of literature around that. I won't call it like that. But the problem with that then is that we allow media to define the boundaries of our relationship. So it cannot be, for example, I know that it cannot be that Nathan is a friend, right? Like it's not a friend, because the beauty of friendship means that it's messy. It's in a sense that I would say things that you might find offensive, or you say things that I might find offensive, but our relationship means that I know that it doesn't come from a certain malicious place. But I think the problem of the issue that media has created is this place of polarization, where I feel like a white person saying anything, as a Black person, a white person saying anything, then they're guilty by by just the fact that they could say something that is because they don't know, and I think there's something malicious behind it. So for me, I think that we have to do the hard work of seeing the enemy is not the white person per se. The enemy is the ideology in itself that puts some on top of others. That's the enemy. And sometimes it also means that one of the things that, when sometimes I think Manuel said it very well in the sense of like, Africa is framed in a certain way, but what I loved about what she said is like, some of it is true. It's like some of it is true. Like, I think sometimes we feel like when we say, let's give another side, we tend to think we're only going to give the good side. But the reality is we are human, we are complex, things are messy, we don't know many things. And I think that's what makes the human situation so messy. And what the media does, it simplifies everything. And simplifying things, the way it does it is it says there is the good guys, the bad guys, and there is the villain, and there's a hero. But the reality is that all of us, in a way, are complex being. We can be both at the same time. And I think for me, what I've found is an antidote to that is to find and build authentic relationships that allow for spaces for ambiguities, spaces for things that don't make sense, right? So for example, if I'm friends with Nathan, that he can ask me questions that, that if he said it in public, people will accuse him of other things, or that I can do the same for him, and that is I think for me what needs to happen is this idea of building relationships and allowing for the complexity of what it means to be human, right? But also without denying some of the evils that are there, right? It's not that we're going to whitewash anything and say, no, it doesn't happen. No, some of it is real. Some of it comes from, even with that, there are instances of racism that are true. There are instances of some call it microaggression or any of those. They're just real, they're there. And there are, of course, extremists. But then sometimes I think the hard part, just like Nathan has said, is some of the ambiguities, some of the things that you might not notice, right? It's, for example, as a man, like certain things that I never noticed was, I always complained it's like, oh, girls don't have an ability to speak. I was like, no, just say it. But then I would notice how I don't notice how maybe there's a certain way when they say things, I might not be able to hear it, or I take it in a certain way, or I make certain assumption because there's implicit bias and all of that. But the answer is not to just say, oh, I'm sorry, I'm just going to say no. The answer is to reach out and do the messy work of, I'm just trying to understand. And it takes, work on all sides to be able to do that, and it's just messy. But I think it's also what makes us human. I think the one last thing that I'll say is that, it is, I think in Africa they say, I am because you are, right? So the concept of ubuntu, right? So I am because we are. So the idea that we can actually divorce the individual from the group is very Eurocentric in a sense. Like for us, we say that when you dehumanize the other, you dehumanize yourself in the process. And I think Frantz Fanon in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, he talks about this idea of, some of the colonial masters who were, in their daily job, they were, really committed harm against the native populations. And one of the things that he notices is that he was a psychologist. He notices that afterwards, the same people were beating their wives, they were becoming alcoholic, and they were doing all these harms to themselves and to the people that they're in community with. And that is this idea that you cannot divorce yourself from others, and the way that you treat others initially is linked to how you will also treat yourself. And that when you dehumanize others, we dehumanize ourselves in the process. And that is a concept that I think a lot of African society have held on to, and it makes total sense.
I guess I just wanted to build up on what you just said. I think in this world, as you said, that it's super, super polarized, we're so afraid to not agree. It's either we all agree that this is bad, or we all agree that this is good. And so there are the good, there are the bad, and it's totally okay to not agree. It's totally okay within the same group of people who have relatively the same understanding that you don't agree on all the details. It's totally okay to not agree with another person. And I think the place where the United States, for as an example, is that we fear that disagreement. We fear that if you disagree with this one thing, then you're the bad guy, right? And then honestly, that just that just kind of fogs our mind to the bigger problem. The bigger problem is not the other person that you are not agreeing with. And it's totally okay that you're not agreeing because you're coming from a different perspective. Totally fine. But the larger concepts are these larger systems, you know, white supremacy, these medias that are constructed. But how, as a white ally, for example, or as a person of color who is in this conversations, how do you differentiate that this is what the system does and this is the person, right? And beyond that, as a person, especially as a person who's an ally to a community, a given community, how do you realize that, yes, you don't agree with, let's say, white supremacy, but you still benefit from it because you're white? How do you realize these benefits that you have, and how do you realize how that impact other people, and how that might basically be one of the reasons you're not arguing on one thing, right? And there is a comment in the chat by Sage where they're saying that maybe this conversation make them think about being in charge of your own media. And I think I've tried to do that. It's terribly tiring, but you could try. You could try, and just make sure that you have a bigger picture in whatever you choose to do. Don't just like block everybody that post about, let's say, Black Death because you're like, okay, I don't want to see this. But like, why are they doing that? And what are the larger conversations they're bringing in? Are they bringing in resources of how you can participate in this activism or whatever it is? And finally, I was thinking of like people in position of power, because yes, we speak, there's only so much power that I as an international student who goes to school in the US, right? There is only as much power that Jean-Michel, for example, has as the founder of this organization in Rwanda, right? But like, what does this, like, what do you do with this power, right? As a white person, let's say, as an ally, as a minority, when you get in power, are you perpetuating this same systems of oppression because that's what keeps you in power, right? And so I just want to just like end this comment by saying hurt people. And if we are not coming from a place of healing as a community, if we get to the top, whatever the top is, we're going to hurt others that are behind us. And how do we stop that from happening? You know, how do we speak from a place of healing, speak from a place of being an ally, speak from all these places that you're coming from, and still do it in ways that does not necessarily harm other people because we've only known a hurtful system. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Before we get to Guadalupe and Sierra, there's a lot in the comments right now. Sage was saying that reconstructing each other is making her think about the incredible importance of being able to be in charge of our own social media production that are the representations of the disseminated world that is disseminated worldwide. Alexis was like, yes, ongoing questions for me as a white person is when becoming the norm and when should whiteness be centered around white supremacy is violent. So we leave the panelists to answer to these questions. Zeus was like, one thing that I have considered recently is how advertising and marketing and that business as the base of our media has impacted media coverage and led to the rise of sensationalism and furthermore of stereotypes globally. Is there any other business model that might lead to more authentic representation, or at least a more balanced approach to representation in the media? Malaki, please correct me if I'm saying your name wrong, was saying we all come from the same place, same people. We need to remember this. Eurocentric views constructed the society that influences the internet. Think of all the content creators that choose to speak English to reach greater audience. Many of the contributors still view the world as good or evil, pure or sinful. The structure of the internet breeds people to be binary. Someone actively needs to find resources that speak fluidity about gender, lifestyle, and culture. While the panelists think about what to answer to this, I'll leave the floor to Guadalupe to say what her views are.
Okay, after hearing all the different opinions and comments, I want to put this idea on the floor, because we know that we are around the world, we are a colonized system, and when we are like this, we have this oppression into people from all the society levels, even if for example, if I were an indigenous person, I know I'm gonna be seen differently, and I'm gonna be microaggressed, if you wanna call it like that, because I live different from the system. And for example, if that indigenous person wants to go to school and wants to do better, here it comes the situation when this person starts thinking about, should I be ashamed of my culture? Should I ignore my culture because I want to be better? And you start being part of the system and being starting to reject others because you're going above. So how do we change this? Because it's the system. The media is to make money, right? All the companies, all they want is money. Even the government, we have to be very careful with it, because the way is democracy and the system works, we know that companies, the biggest ones, have influence on politicians everywhere around the world. So here it comes, for me, it's like all rounded, and where we start to stop oppressing others just to take advantage of something to get better. Even for me, I wouldn't mind, but what I do mind is like, why do you have to oppress or why you have to tell them you're different, you don't belong, we hate you, or because I'm better than you. It happens even into families, so we hurt each other, and we don't have the knowledge to how to handle this, and it's so horrible. And I think this system is everywhere, and it's hard as humans. How do we manage that? Because I don't like the idea of hurting each other, and I leave it up to there. Sorry.
Thank you, Guadalupe. Sierra, you had something to say?
Hi, yes, I wanted to say that I think it's important for us now that we are aware of all of the racial constructs in our society, that we have to also emphasize that we need to know that white does not exist without Black. So in order for white supremacy to excel, Black people have to be suppressed. So I think the question that we really need to ask is, at what point are the whiteness are you able to sacrifice? White people, we need to sacrifice. Sorry, I'm a little sick, so bear with me, but white people need to sacrifice in order for the system to deconstruct. We all know the advantages of being white, and the reality is nobody would change their position to be Black, to be in a Black person's position today. So the advantages of being white would need to be sacrificed in order to officially deconstruct the racial constructs that we have. And if it's not willing to be sacrificed, then we'll never be able to advance as a society. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
I appreciate that contribution, and I want to make sure I'm saying your name properly, Manuel. Cool. Because your questions and framing, and Sierra, I feel like and Guadalupe, your comment is also in that same area. I kind of want to extend what Jean-Michel said about the relationships that we have with others are messy. I think the relationship that we have with ourselves needs to be messy. And the way that we orient to like these structures and systems that are out here. I mean, in thinking about this, I was reminded of a forensics activity that's really like a vocal warm-up that's like big pumpkin, little raisin. And it's really to get you thinking about how your body and voice maybe like takes up different kinds of space, even though as you go smaller, you can maybe, you draw a different kind of attention to yourself. And I took that same activity and I was just like, okay, let's make the relationship we have with ourselves messy. There's these macro discourses that are controlling the way that we think and behave. And then we come back to our little selves and we're like, I don't know, I'm an individual. Maybe I have some agency. I question that all the time, but that we just keep moving back and forth between that idea of like institutional control, media representations that are shaping the way that we orient to others, to again do that like critical thinking, to come back to yourself, to not just surrender to those systems. And I also, the idea of messy relationships with other folks is just making me think about like what it means to be called in versus called out, right? Call out culture, where we kind of want to mark and shame behaviors, which in some cases I think is, it's like healthy. It's like we want to create some distance, like, oh my gosh, that's not me. But then we fail to sort of interrogate what stories does this other person that is perpetuating this myth or committing an act of violence against, what might they believe in that I also believe in? And that's like an uncomfortable question to ask. But when I think about the messy relationships that I've had with people who are culturally different than me, I think about the mistakes that I made. I think about stumbling into histories that I didn't know existed and finding people, Black people, for example, who didn't let me get away with it, right? And maybe made me experience a sense of like discomfort, and maybe kind of created a sense of like a messy relationship with myself, right? I think we've all had those moments where you like, oh, I didn't realize I was stepping into a problematic historical discourse. And if you haven't had those moments, then maybe we got to do more work on the awareness thing. Because I think, again, we should all have a messy relationship with those structures and institutions that are out there.
Can I go? Yeah, but Guadalupe asked a question on what, once you're a minority in spaces that are not designed for you, like when you go to school and all these things, and it just made me reflect on my own personal experience with going to school in the US. And in so many ways, I do understand that those systems have been there for so long, and they do not necessarily always accommodate us, the other, whatever the other is in that bubble. And so I don't think I have an answer to this, but one thing that has worked for me is the importance of this success stories, right? The importance of making it, doing these things, other people like you who are doing things like that. Because there is so much strength in community, especially when you are in the marginalized, especially if you're the other person that doesn't necessarily have any power to change such a big structure. Being able to see other people, I think that has always been very powerful. Seeing other professors at school that looks like me and that think like me, that, you know, are annoyed at things and I get annoyed too. And so that's very important. And definitely being able to be that person for somebody else after you is also very, very priceless. I doubt there is an actual answer, but I'm like, yes, as long as you go to any institution that's not designed for you, it's going to be really, really annoying and painful. And I'm not trying to sugarcoat that, because yes, it's going to be that painful and annoying, but there are people before you who've done that. And it's very important to go out of your way to find those, to be centered in the sense, in the fact that it's possible, regardless of like all the hurdles that come on the way. And Sierra talked about maybe white people needing to sacrifice and to do whatever, even though I think that's a great endeavor. I feel like it's very counterproductive in a system that's there to be just distracting other people, right? And so reducing yourself to that, the same level of, I don't know the right word, but I don't think that's very productive. I don't think it's a productive way to see it. I think if you're as a person who go out of your way to be aware of your privilege, to be aware of all these things, I don't think responding with, okay, this is when I make myself a sacrifice, will actually change the system. While, I don't know, I want to ask, are there ways where you can be aware of your power, use that power and actually change things? You know, be in places where there's marginalized voices can't be, in rooms, in boardrooms where they can't be, you know, and then speaking for them, acting like, I don't know, maybe questioning what allyship means. And lastly, what Nathan said, relationship with other people and ourselves, even people of the same background, people you are almost identical, relationships are messy. And I don't think they're made to be like, nice. That's completely bullshit. But how comfortable are you in like learning how other people function, learning how you function, communicating that part? Because I think also that comes with a lot of privilege of like being aware of that. I don't think a lot of people are aware of that. They know that they're suffering and they know that some shit is going on, but how do you come with that privilege of language? You can pinpoint this is oppression. Maybe there's somebody who can't pinpoint that, but how do you come with that, with a mindset of a student? Like, I'm ready to absorb everything, process it, come with my own take on things. Okay, I feel like I've talked for a long time, so I'll just leave the rest for others.
Thank you, Amandine. Mecca had raised his hand. Mecca, do you still want to say something? You had your hand up for a while, and then we can get to Sierra.
Thank you very much. I think something that I wanted to contribute on this conversation is if you look at the way the system is set today, not only in the US, media has to prove that people should hate each other. Media was used to kind of like push people to hate each other to the point we had the genocide. And also, that was from the government. It was a media that was run by the government, and then people like the government had to use media for their own benefits, for their agenda. So there is too much propaganda in media if it's run by the government. If we don't have, if we do not engage on a personal level, have this conversation with people that we do not necessarily believe the same thing. For instance, me, I used to watch too much of CNN. Then I realized I was becoming more variable. Then to the point I was not believing anything that Michelle says, because maybe sometimes I think is a Trump fan. No, I'm not. I'm joking. So I cannot believe what he says because I don't think I've never heard of it. Now it means to me how I changed that mentality. I started to feel, why can I not engage with Jean-Michel to the point that I want to understand the truth in what he's saying than just criticizing him depending on the information that I've already consumed. So that can really help everyone. If you really engage with people on a personal level, then understand their main views than just criticizing them because you already have a truth that you believe in and you consume that from the type of media that you give. I think
Thank you, Mecca. Sierra, you said you agreed with Sage. Can you please elaborate more on what you meant?
Yeah, I think I meant sacrifice, not on like an individual level where, you know, every white person needs to make a sacrifice, which is awesome, great, you know, but I agree that that's not as impactful. I meant in a more general sense, you know, like if you want, like for the boardroom example, you know, when someone speaks up, they're sacrificing their comfortability in a situation. I meant collectively, like white people need to sacrifice the idea that they can obtain and maintain their white power. The idea that in order for Black people to advance and for them to not be suppressed, that they are going to have to give up the power of whiteness. That's the sacrifice I was talking about on a more impactful level. Because the system for sure is constructed around the power of whiteness, but it's never going to deconstruct unless we get rid of the power of whiteness, which is a sacrifice. So that's kind of what I meant, not on like a smaller scale. Just the whole system would need to be sacrificed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sierra. Time is catching up with us, and so if anybody has any pressing or very interesting points they would like to pass across or speak onto something, we have around 50 minutes for that. So the floor is open.
I'll just extend what I think, because I think Sierra was kind of connecting to what you were talking about, Manuel, in terms of using our power and privilege to then question those systems. And in the act of doing that, are we then making a sacrifice to some of those unearned advantages that, you know, we've gained? You know, sometimes as like privileged people are questioning systems of privilege, I think we have like a habit to like overly center ourselves in some of that, right? And in some ways, like the sacrifice framing, you know, it's totally true, and I'm with it, right? And I'm Googling, you know, how can I Like there is no bank of reparations, but I think that there should be. And I think that all of my interest as a white person, and I won't say whether my ancestors or what they did, but like, I feel like as a white person living in this country, I'm interested in making that sacrifice. But to me, it's like sacrifice is not the right term exactly. It's like in the same way that reparations shouldn't be like a sacrifice. It's like it's a reckoning with our histories. It's a reckoning with our culture and the systems of power that live within us and that benefit us and that benefited our ancestors, right? I mean, white people don't talk about their ancestors as much as people of color do. I think because they're like afraid of what stories they might, I talk to my ancestors, they're totally racist. And, but like we need to, we need to.
I guess when I asked, I meant that sounds like a personal a choice you have to make. You're like, cool, I think these people are marginalized for these reasons. And as a person who's an ally, I'm going to choose to buy from a Black shop to do all these things. And so I think for me, I was just like problematizing the word sacrifice. Because by calling that sacrifice as a white person sounds like crazy. But on the other hand, what Black people go through, it doesn't even equate to that. And I think it's very, as people in the academia, it's very important to use the right words for whatever you mean. That's a simple choice. You just don't go to, Trader Joe's, and you just go down the block and buy for somebody. That's not sacrifice. When you think about it, sacrifice to me should be, how the fuck do we debank this system as a whole that usually benefits me altogether? And so when you say, I think that's not that I was against it. I think it's very important to do these things, to buy a Black, to be there to support all these communities you're being allied to. But it's also important to, I say this because I love languages, but just like use the right words when you, to what you mean. And so that's what I was questioning. Not that I have an answer, I don't. I was just questioning as a white person who feel like, oh, being out of this space, making this decision I wouldn't make otherwise, but that doesn't necessarily change my life. Why the fuck do I call this a sacrifice? While maybe something that I would say is a sacrifice, as a person who's at an institution, maybe a debate coach or something, you make sure that you invite us to have this really, really hard conversations with your student. Okay, that's an actual sacrifice, whatever. But in the sense of, with what we do, how not to praise what people do that is normal, into like, oh my God, that was a sacrifice. And so that way, it pushes us, it pushes you as a person to be like, okay, cool. What are other ways that I can push the system, that I can push back to something that is very substantial for my students, for the community I'm in, right? And so that's where I was coming from when I questioned that, not that I'm against it. Yes.
Can I say something? I think I'm going to, it's a thought. The good thing about having a relationship is you can say thoughts that are not well thought through. So I think on a few things. I personally think that the reason why I hate a lot of diversity talks is that sometimes they do not reflect into how we're going to live our lives. So it ends up being this thing where we come and we talk about this is wrong and this is wrong and this and all these ideas. But the problem is, how does that translate right after the forum is done? Because sometimes I think on one side, I think there's a lot of humming and saying, oh, white people should do this, white people should do this. And okay, sometimes I just feel like, well, some of it is moved with a need for power sometimes. I feel like sometimes is this us versus them, and then, oh, I'm gonna make you feel horrible and make you feel bad for what your ancestors did. And the problem with that is then what? For me, the question is then what, right? Like, where do we go from here? Because, for example, I think that there is more when we base everything on how white people should feel or Black people should feel. I sometimes feel like it's going to become an ego thing, and it's going to become, you're going to require that someone be humble enough to be able to listen, right? But at the end of the day, it doesn't allow us to recreate a certain world, because all it does is also create, I think that's why sometimes I hate these words of oppressed versus oppressor, because sometimes it gives us this idea that the world is such a small place. Like there's not enough for all of us. This idea that in order for a Black person to go up, a white person has to come down, right? This idea that we cannot both do well, right? That we can all benefit. I think that is also a way that we have shrunk our world, that we have made our world so small that we think that it's an us versus them, and that it's a poorer world, that one side has to win in order for the other, one side has to lose in order for the other one to win, right? And then it also creates in my mind this I mean, it's a zero-sum game, right? Like you win, I lose, and all of that. But then the problem is that doesn't allow us to truly live as equal human beings, because as equals means that some win sometimes, others lose, and all of that, and then we build it in that way. But then also the problem I also think is, I think we talk about, I mean, we use the word sacrifice, but it means that something has to be lost. In that sense, for me, that's how I say it. Something has to be lost. In order for change to happen, something has to be lost. But I also think on the other side is something has to be lost on all sides, right? On all sides. It means that if someone is willing to take a step forward, right, that I also have to first allow for that step to happen, right? Create that space for that. But it also means that I have to accept to move forward. And it's this idea that let's build together. It's not like you have to give. I sometimes, honestly, and again, I said it's not a well thought through idea, but it's this idea that you owe me something because of something your grandparents has done. I think it's condescending. Honestly, I just think it's condescending. This idea that because it creates in our mind, whether we want it or not, it creates in our mind this pity. Right? So I'll give you an example. I studied on the East Coast for my undergrad and on the West Coast for my grad school. On the East Coast, there was overt racism, right? So it was really sure, it was these guys who think, oh, you're Black, you don't know this, you're this lower. And it was straightforward, you know how to deal with it. But on the other side, there was what I just use it like that, I might be wrong. I usually call it the liberals racism, the nice racism, which is the low expectations, right? The low, oh my God, like I say, to be honest, I would say some nonsense, I would say some BS, and no one is really, and everyone knows I'm saying BS, but no one is challenging me because they think, oh, you're a Black person, I don't want to be that white person that challenges a Black person. And I think that is condescending. That is condescending. That is really condescending. If you truly think that we're equal, then it also means that you can call out my BS, right? Like, I think that's where we know we're equal. So I think that both worlds are wrong. On one side, I am against this idea of like, oh, I am superior than you and all. But on the other side, I'm also against this pity, this you have it hard. So, I would have it with my professor. I would do below than average work, and I'll get an A. And I knew it's because she just feels like, oh, I know you're dealing with so much, and especially with this time of Trump. I think that was the time Trump had just gotten. But I just think it's condescending. I think it's condescending. And lastly, also this idea of, like, no, I feel like I have the power, like as a white person, I have this power. I honestly sometimes just feel like say, no, my guy, you're as equal as me, and I refuse to treat it as if you are better than me or worse than me. We are equal, right? And I think that the problem with a lot of this stuff is that it ends up being like being a woke or white person, or being a woke, again, ally. It kind of sounds like it's war anyways, but like just it creates these ideas for me like, no, treat me as you would treat your friends. And with your friends, you say you are not walking, tiptoeing and around me, right? Like you're not like, I honestly sometimes used to feel like, that I used to call it that I feel like Harambe, the gorilla around people. Like people are scared of like, oh, what would you say? Because it's like, no, say whatever you would say, because that shows that you see me as an equal. But the moment is the tyranny of low expectations, then that's another way of perpetrating the same thing while we're thinking that we're solving the problem. So I think that creating that other world is refusing also to go in that constant battle of us versus them, but rather the us, let the us be broader, right? The us is, we are trying to build a world where racism or this system does not exist. And we are building what we might call a messy community that is against that. But it is not this idea that it has to be given to us, so that it's messy. And yeah, so anyways, it's a lot of processed thoughts, but I think it's also important that I think it's understanding that being against racism does not mean that you treat your Black friends as trophies, or even your white friends as guilty by birth. It's like you're big guilty just because you're no. I also think it's still playing within the same system. You just have a different culprit, or whoever is guilty.
Thank you, Jean-Michel, for such powerful words. If we could continue, we would go all night around these conversations, but unfortunately, time has caught up with us. And we look into having another event like this so we can continue the dialogue. We're definitely going to do that. And I would like to welcome again Jean-Michel with powerful words as closing remark.
Can I just say real quickly, I love that Jean-Michel's like not well thought out is like stuff that I'll be chewing on for the rest of my life. And the call to be, your authentic, sometimes vulnerable self in spaces, and the call to create collaborative relationships, and the call to not stop marking yourself as a noun that is woke, and to think about whatever that wokeness is like a form of activity and doing and relationship building and collaborative and getting outside of yourself and then coming back to that messy relationship with yourself. Thank you so much to all of the iDebate Rwanda presenters. And I am looking forward to our next event, which we think we already have scheduled for Friday, May 14th at 11 a.m.
Yes.
Jean-Michel, you're doing the closing remarks for.
No, thank you, everyone. Honestly, a good conversation always feels like you can go on and on and on, and it just felt like we're just getting started. So thank you, Nathan and Alex and everyone else from the team, everyone who tuned in. We are going to have another event on the 14th, and honestly, follow us on iDebate Rwanda. Subscribe to our YouTube. You'll see the video in this conversation, and just get in touch with all of us. We'll really love to build. We are all about building relationships, and we want to be able to do that. And thank you to all the folks from the intercultural communication class, I think. So thank you all for coming, and yeah, this was a great event, and have a great night, everyone, or a great day. Night for those who are here. Great day. Yes.